6. The challenge with Unit 6 is not specifically covered in the textbook. Not that it's not covered in the textbook, it is incorporated into the chapters as you go through. So you won't find a specific chapter for this, even though chapter 4 has the major components of this in it. Okay. So what are we looking at here? Well, anytime that you go into write a business plan, to start a business, there are certain risks that you should consider before you get into the opportunity. So this unit introduces students to the concept of risk management and the types of risks faced by small business owners. The unit will discuss how small business owners manage risk and outline the risk management plan strategy for a small business, which normally a business plan would contain a section that deals with risk management. As I say, it's kind of like chapter 4 is the major theme of it. So we're going to define what risk is and the concept of risk assessment. We're going to look at various types of risks, and we're going to discuss how that risk can be mitigated and basically the planning process for making sure that risks are managed. So first and foremost, I suppose the thing that would come to mind is what exactly is risk? Well, risk by definition for business is the chance that something's going to go wrong. And it's always looking at when you do marketing courses or even in a certain degree of accounting courses, but it's what you're always looking at in business is what is the downside of this opportunity? What are some of the things that can go wrong? So the more activities the business becomes involved in, usually means that you're going to be more open to a certain degree of risk. So risk will go up with the I suppose the opportunity. Now, last year, some of you were exposed to, or all of you were exposed to it last term, you were all exposed to statistics. And I've heard you complain and say, oh, my statistics is so much of a pain. And it is. But one of the things that really statistics doesn't do, or we don't do a good job with statistics, is understanding how and why we are looking at statistics in business. And generally, why we're looking at it is to get an appreciation for the fact of a thing called probability. And that is, if we had to make decisions, we are going to be looking at a potential mistake in that decision, meaning that if we choose to go one direction, that direction could be a wrong direction. We don't know. There is a probability of that. And when we look at statistics and understanding for statistics, what we're doing is appreciating how those probabilities or how the chances of mistake are to happen. And obviously, any decision we make going into the future, it's not 100%. We can't guarantee it. But we have an appreciation that statistics gives us an educated perspective on how much risk there is. We're more apt to take that because we'll say, well, there's a 50% chance of something going wrong or a 5% chance of something going wrong. Obviously, if it's a 5% chance, we're much more willing to go down that road than if there's a 50% chance of something going wrong. So if we can kind of put a number on it in terms of how much risk there is, it gives us a better sense. It might not be a comforting sense, but it's a better sense. So small business owners need to anticipate the unexpected. More importantly, they need to understand how to develop an effective strategy to handle and minimize risk in their businesses. So entrepreneurs need to assess the risks for their day-to-day business operations. So starting small business is really no small feat. Many entrepreneurs spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money developing a good plan that kind of fits in this mold of a business plan that allows them to start their business. They don't spend a lot of time probably assessing the risk level of it. So the management of risk is often overlooked by entrepreneurs who mistakenly believe that the loss is best dealt with once it happens and not really before it happens. So risk management is really the idea or the theory behind risk management is if we can anticipate the problems, we can deal with them better. The risk management is the ability to address the risk in order to minimize the effect of it in a business. If effectively managed, the impact of the loss to the business will be minimized. The risk management is a practice of using processes, methods, and tools, usually statistically based, that manage these risks. And risk management focuses on identifying what can go wrong, evaluating what the risks are if something does go wrong, and dealing with it. So entrepreneurs who have identified the risk will have a better idea of how to deal with them and what is the cost of them if they were to happen. This increases the probability that the business is going to be successful. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is just anticipating problems so that you can better deal with them. So I guess fundamentally, the takeaway from all that is you really need a plan to deal with the risks. You know, if you're set up in a trade show selling magnets and the guy next to you is selling super knives, there is a certain degree of risk when you go to connect the two. So we got to ask ourselves fundamentally, whenever we're looking at this, we need to be able to kind of look at it unemotionally and say, what are the possible things that can go wrong? The possible events, I call it. And what are the impacts of those, or what could be the impacts of those on my business if it did go wrong? And from there, that allows you to kind of start your risk management process. So for a small business person, you got to ask, well, what kind of risks are out there anyway? What should I look at? And there's a lot. I got a bunch listed here. You know, businesses are prone to numerous risks, which will vary from one business to another. Some of these risks can be avoided by obtaining insurance, so we can minimize our risks by buying insurance. That's what most people do. Realistically, the insurance industry is all about mitigating risks. It doesn't eliminate the risk. What it does is it eliminates the financial risk. However, there are a number of risks that can't be avoided or minimized by insurance policies. As such, it's important for an entrepreneur to ensure that his or her own personal assets are safely secured, I'll call it, in the event that the risk happens. This is where we get into, you know, the idea of forming a corporation to protect yourself from personal liability. So in general, risk emerge from the following. Natural hazards. You know, if you think about what exactly is a natural hazard, well, that's something that is beyond your control. Okay? It is just natural. Rain, wind, fire, these sorts of things are natural hazards. You can pray, but that, you know, it's not very helpful if you are not prepared for it. So hope is not really a strategy. You got the planet. An example, for example, Marianne, up your way, yesterday, the roof was damaged on the water tower again. That's a natural hazard that the town has. And, you know, it's about the fifth time that water tower has been damaged by wind. And we're always having wind here. So we need a better solution than what we've come up with so far. But that's an example of a natural hazard. Whenever we build a $2 million water tower, we got to expect that sometimes it's going to get damaged by wind. Contracts and legal relationships. Well, from our law course, if we recall our law course, that's one that is fairly common. Whenever you write a contract or enter into a contract, you are making a promise to do something that if you don't follow through on, you could theoretically be sued for. That is a risk. That is a risk. Or if you do follow through on it and something goes wrong, you know, that is a risk too. So contracts and legal relationships are big in business. Everything from employment contracts to contracts for services, all of these sorts of things come with a certain degree of risk. Financial operations is a really big one. You don't have enough money to pay your bills. If you're a restaurant and you get struck by COVID, for example, and your restaurant is shut down, how are you generating revenue to pay your bills? Your bills will continue, but if you're not open, your revenue is not continuing. That creates a problem. Misconduct of employees. We've talked about this in law. We've talked about it in other courses as well. Let's assume that your employees do something wrong, maybe fraudulent, they steal from you, okay? So they take money. Or it could be an act of omission. You hire an employee to drive a truck. The employee does not such a good job driving a truck, has an accident and kills somebody. That's misconduct by an employee. Again, because of vicarious liability, we talked about this in law, you or your company would be responsible for the damages. Acts or omissions of third parties. Let's assume something goes wrong. You hire someone to do something for you, to plow your snow, to plow your driveway. That person then becomes what's called a third party. Or, that person does whatever they do and it causes problems for somebody. Let's assume, for example, you hire someone to clear your driveway. They clear your driveway, but they forget to salt it. Someone walks into your business, slips and falls. Well, the omission was the fact that your snow clearer did not do a good job, did not put down adequate salt, and you are stuck with the damages from that. Another big one that a risk comes from is federal, provincial, and municipal laws or regulations. And this is a common one, for example, where new legislation comes down that causes something that was perfectly legal not to be legal anymore. If we're looking at environmental regulations that government will impose with regards to pollution, for example, a business that is in the oil refining business may find themselves in a position where they're polluting too much, or they have to create some mitigation for damages created by what they did. Economic conditions. We saw, for example, the oil industry goes belly up because the price of oil drops. That has serious impact on a lot of businesses. Property loss. This is where a business gets destroyed, burned down, blown down, water, overwhelmed with water, these sorts of things. That's an example of property loss. Use of technology is another big one. We hear the term disintermediation. If you are selling insurance, let's assume you had a business where your job was selling insurance. You were an insurance agent. So many insurance agents are being put out of work today because people are buying their insurance online. And this means that these intermediaries, these insurance agents are being disintermediated by the internet. So their business is basically disappearing out from under them. And the workforce. Maybe your workforce is just not there for you. Maybe you just don't have any skilled employees that could work. These sorts of things, that's a risk for your business. So all of this then points to the need to have various strategies to mitigate all of those potential risks and more. So when many business owners think about risk management, it usually is limited to purchasing standard insurance, and really insurance is just not going to cover all of the ones that we just talked about.
In this video, I want to give you an overview of risk management and how to manage project risk.
Let's assume you're building something.
Risk management is a core part of all project management. And the reason is simple. Projects are novel and uncertain endeavors. And that novelty, that uncertainty means that things can happen that you're not expecting. Projects are inherently risky. And so we need to manage that risk to stay in control of our projects. And the basic risk management process has 4 steps. The first step is to identify the risks, and the best way is always to get a group of people together and just list out everything you can think of that could possibly go wrong. Of course, some of the things you think of are incredibly unlikely, but we'll come to that later. Another good way to identify risks is to look at the different aspects of the project and ask what can go wrong on a category by category basis, however you choose to break up your project. And so risk management can start in earnest once you've started to think about the scope of your project, and you can go to a greater level of depth once you've got a work breakdown structure. Another great approach is, as you move through your career from one project to another, keep a record of all the risks that are identified in each project. And that way you'll have a master list of risks which you can draw down on for identifying potential risks for each new project. Once you've identified your risks, the next step is to understand them, to analyze those risks. Now, the definition of a risk is uncertainty that can affect outcome. Therefore, the two principal components of a risk are the likelihood with which it might happen and the impact it will have if it does. The uncertainty is measured by likelihood, and the effect on the project is measured by the impact. There are other things we can bring into our analysis if we're taking on risk management at an advanced level, like proximity. However, for most of us, for most projects, estimating the likelihood and the impact of our risks is the key to good risk analysis. Now, when you're thinking about likelihood for your risks, my key piece of advice is keep it simple. Because human beings are rubbish at estimating the likelihood of uncertain events. And the consequence of that is that if you try to be too precise, too specific about the likelihood of your estimates, then they're likely to be rubbish. A simple scale of low, medium, and high, or if you want a little bit more precision, very low, low, medium, high, and very high, is all you need as a scale for the likelihood of your risks. For the impact, you can use a more sophisticated scale if you choose. The first thing to think about is, what do you really care about? Do you care about the impact of risks on your budget? Because if that's the case, then you may have a scale of hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and even millions of dollars. Or you may care about the schedule effect of a risk. What will it do to the delivery date? In which case your impact scale might be days, weeks, months, quarters, or years. You might be interested in the reputational effects. If something goes wrong, how will it affect our reputation? Will we see a small paragraph in a trade journal or a local paper? Or will we see a full article? Or will that article make its way through to the national press? Or will it get onto the front page of the national press? Or will it dominate the 10 o'clock news for day after day? But for most of us, a simple scale is to first think about the smallest level of impact being one that requires some form of corrective action. A greater impact may need you to think about a new plan for how you're going to deliver that part of the project. Or you may need a whole new strategy for how you're going to deliver the whole project. Or it may be worse than that, and no amount of replanning and new strategies will allow you to achieve all of your objectives. One or more of your objectives will be compromised if this risk occurs. And of course, the greatest level of risk that you should be managing without highly specialized experience is the risk that the project will fail. The goal of your project is compromised. Yes, of course, there are higher impacts than that. People being hurt, or the reputation of your organization being permanently tarnished. But of course, if those are real risks, you need to bring in real experts to help you manage them. Now, once you've analyzed your risks, you can then triage them by looking at where they appear on a simple graph of likelihood versus impact. And of course, the further up towards the top right-hand corner that they appear, then the more serious that risk is and the more strategies you will need to manage your risk. So step 3 of our risk management process is to put together a plan for how you will handle that risk. And we build our plans from a number of component strategies. And the 6 core strategies that I always build my plans from are, firstly, to see if you can do anything to remove the risk entirely. This is the gold standard. But on many projects, for many risks, it is not possible to remove the risk entirely. But if you can, you should do so. The second strategy is to reduce the likelihood, to make it less likely that that risk will materialize. Strategy number 3 is to reduce the impact of the risk. If it happens, then what can we do to make it less severe, less serious? Fourthly, we could transfer some or all of that risk to a third party. The obvious example is insurance. But remember, every time you enter into a contract for professional services of one form or another, you are transferring some of that risk to the other party and using the contract to enforce that transfer. The fifth approach is to accept that the risk may happen and to build a contingency plan so that you can handle that risk should it materialize. A plan B. This is about having the resources and the preparedness to deal with the outcome should the risk occur. And of course, the 6th strategy is to accept the risk. If the level of threat is small enough and you consider that none of the other strategies offers a cost-effective solution for reducing the risk, then it's totally appropriate to accept the risk and accept that if it does occur, you'll need to do something about it. But hopefully it will not be a very serious risk, because otherwise you will have implemented one or more strategies. And clearly for the highest likelihood and impact risks to the top right, you'll need a whole basket of strategies to handle them. And finally, the 4th stage of risk management is, of course, to put your plans into action. And hopefully you will have documented your risks and your plans on a risk register, which is, if anything, the one single most important project management document that you will have. That risk register becomes part of your audit trail and therefore a document of governance. But it's also a management tool that allows you to track what you are doing and to keep an eye on your risks. And of course, every time you take an action, you can then record that action on your risk register and monitor the impact it has on your risks. If the action doesn't satisfactorily reduce the risk, then analyze why not, come up with an additional plan and take further action. And that's the cycle of success. Understand the situation, put together a plan, take action, and review where you are and understand the outcome. So risk management is a simple 4-step process. It's supported by some very simple, straightforward analytical tools that you can use on any project and a set of 6 strategies from which you can build plans to handle your risks. The primary tool for risk management is your risk register or risk log, and I would recommend that every project manager builds your own version. Base it on a template like ours, by all means, ideally in the form of a spreadsheet or something like that. But critically, having and using a risk log is not the same as managing your risks. You've got to act on the plans you put together. You've got to allocate each risk to a named individual, make them responsible, and follow up. Make sure that changes are happening. If you do all of this, you'll find that risk management becomes part of your routine. And when you do risk management well and effectively as a part of a regular project management routine, you will stay in control.
So you can see just from his presentation there that, if you think about a business plan as a project or developing a business as a project, that risk management is an essential ingredient that you need to look at in terms of as you go along. And he's noted in his presentation here about a series of steps that we need to do to analyze a problem, be able to assess the risk, manage the risk, and then put the plans in action. And that's effectively the standard that's used. Now, different sources will say there's a different number of steps, but it really is irrelevant. The basic concept is analyze what the situation is, look at the probability of, be able to assess which ones are more important than the other effectively, and then put a plan in action in order to be able to resolve this. So what we have to do is to consider likelihood of cause and likelihood of effect. So it's really a pretty straightforward process. Okay, we got to be able to predict and then plan. How do we look at this? Well, he mentioned in there this idea of assessing lists. What we got to do is think about risk in terms of a likelihood, and this is what I go back to the stats. We talked about the probability of an event happening, right? What is the likelihood? And we also need to look at what is the impact of that if it were to happen. So project items that are defined as risky, that have high likelihood and high impact if they were to happen, are very important ones that we need to really, really consider the risk of a lot. And what are we going to do? A lot. Items that are low risk of happening or low likelihood problems that have low impact if they did happen are ones that we don't need to look at too much. So as we move up through the categories, we really need to figure out each risk item, where does it fit on this categorical scale? And we want to focus our attention on high risk, high impact problems. So really, ultimately, it comes down to this simple mathematical equation. Risk is really a function of the probability of the event times the consequences of it occurring. And we really need to list down all the events that can happen, estimate this in terms of these probability calculation, and then we can figure out what is it, or be able to rank, what is it that's most important to deal with. I'll show you how that's done now. So generally, we do this in a 4-step process. Now, there could be more steps, as I say, different processes are going to say different things, but the basic crux of all the processes are this. Identify it. What is the risk? Let's identify what could potentially happen. Then once we get it identified, we analyze what are the probabilities and the consequences. And we ask, well, okay, considering how important it is, relative to this probability consequences, what are we going to do in order to mitigate it? What are the strategies we need to put in place? And then finally, the control and the documentation. So you think about risk, it really comes in clusters. If you think about a small business, you need to be able to look at these 5 elements to think about what is it that I should be focusing on, okay? What are the financial risks? How are financial risks going to affect my business? And things like not getting paid, suppliers not doing what to say, us not paying our bills. What are the consequences of that? That sort of thing. That would be financial risk. Technical risks. What are some of the technical issues? Do the machines break down? Does our building burn down? Does something bad happen like that? That will be considered a technical risk. Commercial risk. This is chances of getting sued because we didn't live up to our end of the contract. And execution risk. This is when we actually do something doesn't work. So we really need to think about those in terms of risk, and then we think about risk of, well, what are the legal risks in terms of what is it going to cost us in terms of penalties. First and foremost, we need to think about how can we stop anything from happening to start with, okay? Stop stuff before it ever happens, that way we don't have to worry about it. So preventing risk, your risk management plan needs to outline preventative steps that it will take in order to reduce the chances of a threat occurring. So the logical first thing to do is let's stop stuff before it ever happens. So security details, an example, ways to prevent threats such as intoxicated guests walking into a body of water at an outdoor venue. So to prevent dangers of a nighttime event, hire lighting companies, set up illumination. So this basically is a prevention method. Now, if we look at this, for example, here, the possible hazard and probability and the consequence, again, we're doing this mathematical calculation here. Let's say cold temperature is the hazard. What is the probability of that occurring? Moderate. What are the consequences or severity if it does happen? Well, it depends on the severity of the temperature and how well dressed the participants are. So if you got an outside venue on the go, we got to make sure that, if it's going to be cold, we got to tell people to make sure they dress warm. And what can we do in order to mitigate it? Rain or snow, probability of occurrence, likely. What are the consequences of severity? Likely. We're going to have to look, for example, can we cancel the venue? If we got a rock concert going on, for example, we get rain or snow. If the probability of it, this happens, like you think about in St. John's, at the down at Kitty Lake, they built a tent down there, and the tent was really a kind of a risk prevention item because usually it rains in September, or held a concert. You're probably going to get rain, and that's not going to be so good. So let's put it in a tent. That was a mitigation process until last year when the tent blew away. So they learned that wind is a probable risk for the tent. In terms of planned responses, we need to be able to include in our risk management plan their response for each potential threat. So that should it happen, this helps you prepare for a worst case scenario, prevent injuries, lost money. So an example is to plan for tents in case of light rain for an outdoor party. Creating a contingency plan or alternative location for events is another way to do it. So the area concern is safety of people. Strategies is putting security, or safety of people. Strategies could include lighting, and who's responsible for doing that. These are very simplistic examples of how risk can be prevented. But we know that we can't eliminate all risks, okay? So what do we need to do in terms of a process? What do we need to do in order to make this real in terms of a workable way of managing things? Well, the first real step, as we've identified, is to identify the basic risks. So some risks are common to most all businesses. Others are very specific to your type of business, and only you are going to be able to tell what the risks are. So the best way to approach it is to use a standard risk checklist as a set way of figuring out what's going on. If you look at the internet for your type of business, you can find out what are some of the risks of operating an ice cream stand or a hardware dealership, or these sorts of things. So the Small Business Administration provides a small business insurance and risk management guide which addresses potential risks. So you go to a COA or people like that who supply a lot of information for business, they usually have a listing of particular types of things that come under the category of identifying risk. Some initial rank the risks of any business. So property losses, typically occur from physical damages, loss, or use, criminal activity. Business interruption losses occurs as the business stops selling stuff for some reason, COVID, for example, for restaurants. In addition to property loss incurred, the company would not be able to produce goods or sell them. So this is kind of an interruption. We can't, do what we need to do. We got liability losses. Someone sues us and we lose a court case. Key person losses. A lot of organizations have key people. You talk about a graphic design business who has a graphic designer. If the graphic designer is the only person in the business knows how to draw, that's an important person for the business. What happens if that person left? What are our mitigation strategies for that? And injuries to employees. And, we normally have insurance to protect those sorts of things, or workers' compensation, but all the same, we got to think now that person could be a key person, and that could have a significant impact. Other common types of risks that are more common but less well thought about is absenteeism, people don't show up to work. Resignations, people quit. Staff pulled away back to other departments, so you lose your people. Skills or staff not available, you just don't have that. Incomplete specifications, this happens a lot in manufacturing businesses. Someone sends you a set of specs to make something and it's not complete. You can't do it. That has an impact. Time and cost overruns. You expect it will take you 2 weeks to do, and actually take 3. Now, if you're running a shipyard where you have the yard booked for different boats coming in at different times, if one boat gets delayed, that has a ripple effect on everything else, right? So that can have a big impact. Worker change orders, and this is something that we've run into with the town, for example. Very concerned when we built the new town hall. Change orders tend to drive up the cost of building because we realize something a little bit far along, and we say, oh, the roof needs to be replaced. We found that roof's bad. These are things that sometimes can't be predicted, but what you try to do is do enough planning so you don't run into change orders, because change orders can cost you a lot of money. And with the town hall, we did have some change orders, but it still wasn't that much. It was in a couple $100,000 on a $2.5 million project. So how do we figure out all this stuff? Well, the very first thing we need to do is to hold some sort of a brainstorming session. Let's think about all the potential things that can go wrong. And also we can ask experts, and they just said, you can go to the COSA world. They usually have checklists for this sort of thing. And these are people who have lots of experience in this business, and those are great people to ask. Past history. If we've run a business for a long time, we know that generally it will happen. White Hills, for example, you think about the risk of White Hills. White Hills downhill skiing has a certain element of risk, no doubt about it. And we can pretty well guarantee at White Hills that every 3 years, someone's going to hurt themselves. We do everything we can to try to prevent that and make sure we do. But almost every 3 years, inevitably, someone's going to end up having a case against the hill for whatever. And that's something that we prepare for by buying insurance. And multiple or team-based assessments usually end up putting people together, teams of people together who look at different aspects to find potential risks. So, okay, we've done a risk assessment. Now we got to think about our particular company's vulnerability. That's the second biggest thing. A vulnerability is really a function of probability. What are the odds that something's going to happen? What are the odds? And all of this is really an odds game. And you wonder why you were doing stats. This is what stats is all about. These type of odds are really as much a crapshoot or statistical tool are useful in doing this. So the goal is to kind of qualify the risk as being very important stuff we got to worry about, or not so important stuff we don't have to worry about. And we need to think too, okay, if the risk of it happens, we need to correlate that with how much damage could happen. I usually would like to see something like this, where we look at the likelihood and the consequences, same sort of thing. And generally, if it's low likelihood with low consequences, not something we have to worry about. Something that's high likelihood and high consequences, that's something that we certainly have to worry about. Okay, so this is extremely important. Whereas things that are falling in this gray zone, which are high likelihood, low consequences, or low likelihood, high consequences, these are also important. So really, 3/4 of these blocks are critically important. Let's think, for example, Air Canada. Let's say that we're Air Canada and they got to do a personal health assessment risk. Every once in a while, they would have to get together and think about what are the probabilities of certain things happening. I just want to illustrate high probability, low probability, and high consequence, low consequence here. So they would have a rating scale such as this, okay? So they listed down events. I've only listed 3 here. There could be 3,000, okay? The probability of it occurring. So we have to think about in terms of percentage chance, okay? 20% chance, 0.05% chance, 0.00001% chance. So we think of probabilities going down, right? Basically, I got a high probability event, very low probability event. But also we need to think about, it's not good enough to think about probability, you got to think about the consequences of it. What are the consequences? And we can rate them from a scale of 1 to 5, okay? So I've just put in a simple scale of 1 to 5 here. And from that, we multiply the probability times the consequences to get us a level of relative health risk. So let's take, for example, running out of snacks. People are hungry. I'll call it a health risk. Let's assume that our flights, if it's a long flight, 20% chance that the flight will run out of snacks. That's 1 in 5 flights. That's a lot, right? That's a high probability that that's going to occur. But we also say, well, what are the consequences of that? Realistically, people are not going to die because of this. Their health is not going to be affected by it. So we say very, very low consequence. So even though it's a high probability, low consequence, it would come up with a 0.2 health risk level. 20% times 1. How about a tire blowout? You're going down the runway and the tire blows out. Well, that has a consequence of 3. So that's a moderate consequences, cause damage to the airplane, whatever. But the chances of it happening are 0.005. So that's what, that 5 in 1,000 or 5 in 10,000? 5 in 1,000. So the health level risk is 0.015, which is actually a lot lower than the peanuts, even though tire blowout seems a lot more significant, but the chance of it happening are so much less. And a crash, you think about it, well, it's the worst case scenario isn't a crash. Well, what's the probability? Well, we're really looking at close on 1 out of a million. And it's even lower than that. What are the consequences? Very high. But still, the health risk is relatively low. So we ask ourselves here, okay, management, what should we focus on? And oddly enough, the peanut issue and the snack issue is going to be more important than the crash issue. Because even though crashes are much more consequential, the probability is that that's not going to happen. But if we dealt with the issue of the health risk of the peanuts or the snacks, we'd be better off. I'm not saying we can ignore important things. I'm just saying the probability of those important things are so low that it just is not relevant for us to concern ourselves with to any great extent. But we do need to prepare, and this is where the plans come in: contingency plan, contingency plan, contingency plan. This goes beyond just buying insurance. Many things need to be thought about. We implement policies that value employee safety over speed, for example. Airplanes, that's the key thing, that safety is the most important thing in the airline industry. It has to be, because companies will go bankrupt if they're not safe. Installing a security system to guard against property losses could be an example of one type of thing. Avoiding transactions with dubious potential customers. Train high potential managers on the values and the roles and responsibilities of the business and what they do. So in terms of mitigation strategies, we got to assume, we can assume and accept the risk, which is really acceptance. If you're going to be flying airplanes, you've got to risk that gravity could take hold sometimes and cause the planes to crash. But realistically, how often is it going to happen? You got to identify it and think about, what is the probability in relation to the consequences. Risk avoidance, which is probably the best thing to do, which is just whatever we can do to eliminate risk, do it. Controlling the risk, which is normally what we do. Certain things have a certain degree of risk, and you need to control it. So policies, protective equipment, guarding, these sorts of things would come into play. Transferring risk. This is what we buy insurance for. Effectively, what insurance does is it transfers the risk to someone else. So we pay them to take on the risk. That's what insurance really is. Probably one of the key things, though, is to monitor. Where are the risks? What's happening? What's not happening? If we can monitor risk, we can ensure that we don't run into some problems. In terms of insurance, and that's this transferring risk, we got to think about what is it that we need to transfer out. We need to think about different types of insurance. There's liability insurance that we need, covers expenses related to legal liability for someone who's injured. Typically covers property damage, bodily injury, medical expenses, cost of hiring legal counsel, and so on. Depending on the type of business you have, too, you got product liability insurance, which covers expenses related to legal liability for injury or damages caused by a defective product that your company makes. So if your company manufactures, distributes, or sells products, then it should have that type of insurance. It could be professional liability insurance, depending on what type of business you're operating in. But if you're a professional, you need insurance there, similar to product liability insurance, but for services instead of products. So we talked about the Algo Center Mall there and how the roof collapsed on it. There's an example of professional liability insurance that engineers would hold, for example. And we also have commercial property insurance, which covers loss and damages to business property. So if your business burns down, it basically replaces the business. The fourth and final step is monitor and control as needed. Your risk management plan should always be reviewed and updated regularly, taking a few days every 6 months to review what you got. So it should include the owners, department heads, risk management consultants, if you have them, depending on how big you are. So insurance companies are going to keep an eye on this sort of thing. And one of the interesting things in today's world with regards to this monitoring issue is that literally it's a good idea to monitor your premises with video cameras, because let's assume that your ski hill, well, I'll just use the ski hill. If you have cameras monitoring what's going on, it allows you to mitigate some of the risk, because if someone is out doing dangerous activities on the slopes, let's assume they're skiing exceptionally fast, skiing on one ski, whatever, you'll have a video of that actually happening, and you'll be able to go, if you get dragged into court, you can say, look, this person contributed to their own injury by doing these sorts of things. So video monitoring is often a way of kind of mitigating some of the risks that you would serve, if you can't prove that you did everything you possibly could in order to make sure the place was safe. So we have to really, as small business people, have an idea of what the risks are and how to manage it. We're not going to eliminate all of it. What we can eliminate, we should, but we cannot possibly eliminate everything. So here's a simple example of Roost management plan. Okay, so you got an outdoor event, and this comes with all kinds of risks with regards to rain and weather and the like. So the risk management plan enables you to identify potential risk, take steps to prevent or anticipate risk, and make some prevention plans. So you also get a better sense of how to control the environment that's naturally difficult. So what do we got to do? Identify the risk. Well, when outdoors, the weather is a factor and force the event to change. So specific location is an additional risk factor. For example, if you're hosting an event near open water or mountainous area, you could have drowning, falls, wind, particularly if alcohol is involved. Sanitation becomes a problem if you have a long outdoor event. You think back in the age of some of these great rock concerts, very, very dirty. Woodstock, classic example of in the late 60s, where, gee whiz, what a mess, because it was raining all the time and no bathrooms, these sorts of things. Guests need access to sanitary restrooms and areas of cleanup. In the event they run in the evening, we need lighting. We got to evaluate the threat. Outdoor risks identified. Next, evaluate the potential threat of damage from each one. So we basically do this multiplication of the probability of the event consequences. For example, the weather during early spring and northern climate is unpredictable, with the potential for cold temperatures and precipitation ranging from rain to snow. Determine the risk of inclement weather and how it would affect your event. Snow during an outdoor spring wedding would force the event indoors, while a little snow at an outdoor event may cause a change in course, but shouldn't cancel the event completely. But if we have something like we had last night, that could have a big impact. So we got to look at what are the events and what are the likelihoods. So when completing risk, use a table similar to the ones I've showed you in order to be able to do that. So we got to be able to kind of say, okay, what are the likelihoods? What are the consequences? So in terms of key strategies, we assume and accept the risk. In ski hill business, that is something you have to do. We try to avoid the risk by, basically clear off trees. Don't have trees in the middle of the, that sort of thing would be an example. Controlling the risk, putting sandbags, or what do we call them? Hay bales around trees. Transferring the risk, we do that all the time. Every year, White Hills spends $50,000 on insurance. That's transferring the risk. So what you're doing is saying, okay, if you cover me, I'll pay $50,000, insurance company, if you take over all of the worry that I have about risk. And watch them under risk. This is something companies need to do, is to be able to do this sort of thing on a constant basis. And literally, a lot of times, like things like ski hills, stuff is watched and monitored on TV monitors because closed circuit television, if you go to any of the large amusement parks, for example, everything is on closed circuit TV. People are watching all the time. And that's as much to save them as anything else is to save you, because they need to be able to prove that they were doing things right. And if you got it on TV, it provides that evidence. What are the types of insurance you can buy? General liability insurance just covers you for liability. It's what you have in your car. When you drive, you have general liability insurance. So if you run over someone, they sue you, basically the insurance company pays the bill. Product liability insurance, if you're making a product that causes someone harm, that risk is transferred to a company, they'll pay the bill. Professional liability insurance, if you are doing some services that are considered professional services, such as engineering, dentistry, doctoring, you buy liability insurance. Doctors buy this all the time. They make a mistake, the insurance pays the bill. Commercial property insurance, and again, that covers the loss or damages of property. So if the property were to burn down, so what they'll do is the insurance company will pay you not only to replace the business, but lost income, that sort of thing, depending on what the insurance coverage. Final step to monitor and control is needed is to constantly be watching what's on the go, what are the worrisome issues, and minimizing that risk. And I gave a little example there the other day. So outdoor events. I won't go through that one again. I'm going to go right down to these key points here. And these key points here dealt with the idea of what can we do in order to minimize our risk. Get insurance. That's the number one thing for any small business. Make sure you got insurance. Your business plan should indicate that I need insurance. This is the type of insurance I need. Here's how much it's going to cost. Diversify your products and services. Don't rely on every single thing. Bombardier recreational products, through the 1980s, for example, they had some problems. Why did they have problems? Bombardier at the time. Because snowmobile sales were dropping. There was a number of things. Price of gas was going up. People were getting older. The environment was coming into play. So they recognized that, they had some real risk in terms of if they kept on making skidoos and that was their only product. So they eventually got into diversifying their product line. They started making sea-doos, for example. Or planes, trains, and automobiles was another thing that they made. And what we saw was a diversification of the company. And that meant that they weren't reliant on a winter product solely anymore. It was a broader range of products. Since 2004, the company was split into its own recreational division, BRP. And you'll notice that BRP has got into things like side-by-sides and quads more than skidoos now, because, again, snowmobile sales have been dropping. And the fact is, if you look at the average age of snowmobilers, it's over 50 now. And that's not a good sign for a business that is going to want to continue. The outlook for snowmobile manufacturers are not great because of between global warming and the fact that the age of the average user is getting higher, that's not a good sign. Okay. Another thing that you want to do is limit your business loans. The trick is with loans is the more you have, the more you're going to have to pay, regardless if you have the ability to pay it. The business loans is a real challenge because the fact is that the more you take on, the more liability that your business will face. You'll have to pay those bills. If you can't pay them, you could end up running out of cash in your business. Knowing the law, we've done in this particular business program, for example, we've introduced you to basics of law. That's something that so many business people are not aware of, and you really need to be. Things like the Sale of Goods Act, Labor Standards Act, Occupational Health and Safety Act, these all are important to be at least aware of. Many business people aren't even aware that they're existing, and odds are they're going to end up in trouble because of that. Document everything. Always document important transactions in your business. And this includes things like when you make payments, your costs. This is a rule that I have. Like I document everything with regards to my courses. because you won't have a leg to stand on, or you won't be able to find information if something goes wrong. So it's important that you make sure that the employees and yourself are documenting everything properly. Cash registers, stuff like that. It has become easier now to document thanks to technology, but it is important that we've got to be able to retrieve it. So we need a good retrieval system. Hire good employees. These employees, this is challenging many businesses now as we got fewer people to hire. So that's probably one of the biggest things that businesses can do is in order to minimize risk is have good people. And that reduces risk. Build your reputation. Reputation saves you in the event of problems. So people want to deal with businesses that have a good reputation. So it's important to be able to nurture and build a reputation. And the final one is data protection. I mean, the provincial government ran into a good example of that when all of the stuff for the Eastern Health System was stolen, and it's quickly been, the government haven't made a big fuss about it because it's super embarrassing, but also it's super concerning. And they don't need the public to concern. But protecting data is a critical one because not only you have your own self to worry about when you got other people's data. So when your clients, customers give you data, their credit card information and the like, if you're not responsible with it, not only could you be damaged, they could be damaged, and that affects your overall reputation. As I say, financial risk is a big one. Collection risk is particularly troublesome for most businesses. And that is, will I get my money? So, you can easily rack up some big people owing you a lot of money. You can rack up very quickly, and you're financing them. And if you don't get that money, that's a big problem. So we got to think about what can we do in order to minimize collection risk. Well, the first thing we need to do is make sure our invoices go out. And this goes back to a people issue. If you cannot get your staff to properly invoice, that means money's going to be slow coming into your business. And as I say, money's the lifeblood of a business. Without having that money coming in, you could go into serious financial difficulty and effectively ruin your business. So it's vital that your cash flow be good. You invoice your customers as soon as you supply their products as opposed to doing it later. Because every minute that they have that item and you don't have the cash for it, you're financing them. Organize your collection system. You need a collection system. So an accounting system such as what you're learning in Simply Accounting, it's not called Simply Accounting anymore. It's called whatever it's called now, QuickBooks or whatever. You need to make sure that you have a good collection system to keep a handle on how much is owed, how old it is, and that sort of thing. We got to be able to set up a predetermined contact system. So people who owe you money, and this is a real challenge, and I know the town has this issue too. If people haven't paid their bills, you need to be able to constantly be on them, respectfully. But the fact is that the longer the money is outstanding, the less likely you're going to be able to collect it. Create a script for the interaction in encounters. One of the things that you're doing when you're looking for money is being able to get people to pay. And usually if you have a series of questions or what's called a script, pre-drafted letters or pre-drafted phone conversations or pre-drafted, you can create a consistent message that first of all is legal and second of all ensures that you've covered all your bases so that in a court of law you will have a leg to stand on. Another thing you can do, that's the stick approach. The other approach is the carrot approach, where you can reward early payment. And this is where the 210 net 30 that you learn about in accounting comes in. If people pay within 10 days, they get a 2% discount. That encourages speedy money. And if you got large invoices, partial payments is better than no payment at all. Half up front, half on delivery, that sort of thing would certainly come into play. Because ultimately, with financing, you're financing someone else if you give them credit, and that is a bit of a challenge for most businesses. So that's a very brief summary of what we really need to do whenever we assess risk. is take a look at what is the likelihood, what are the consequences for each of the potential risks that you can calculate, and make a plan to deal